Hi folks, I'm DeLeon. Today we'll be talking about project-based learning through making games. That's this March 2026. My main work is DevPodGG. And the first thing I want to point out is that to me, making more games being made isn't really what's important. More games are getting made, but that's not why I'm doing this. That's not why I'm giving this talk. Learning to make games or to land a job in the game industry, though people do that through the kind of work I'm talking about, is not the main goal. I help people make games together so they'll improve at other life skills. And the way to think about this, right, is like, why do people play high school sports? A few may go to the NFL, a few may go to the NBA. For the most part, though, it's because it's like enriching their lives, right? Through the practice of preparing for events, going through the events, they're learning skills, socializing, developing themselves, building confidence, things that help other areas of their life. And so it's one of the reasons why no matter what the game industry's ups and downs are, no matter what the shape is of other things in the ecosystem, I think it's a worthwhile activity to help people build games together. My central belief is people can make their life better by making their own games together. It helps us develop valuable skills. Even people who don't want a job in the game industry should be making games too, is part of the reason for this argument. It's nothing against any of that going on. That's all valid. Clearly, we're all here. But I kind of want everyone else doing it as well. And I think of it like, what if most homes had a piano in it, and most families didn't have anyone who could play it? What a waste, right? Many homes have a standard home computer that's sufficient for them to build their own video games. In most cases, no one in that house is doing it. We can fix that. Alternate titles might be teaching that doesn't feel like or look like teaching to outsiders. I occasionally get some flack because it looks like I'm being a little laissez-faire about my approach. Or the best thing we can do for our students is decenter ourselves, getting out of their way. This started actually for me extracurricular, as starting a club 22 some odd years ago, released 200 free games, even though I graduated from that after a few years. Because it was extracurricular, we didn't have some of the same constraints that classrooms do. There wasn't a challenge of having art students and comp sci students and writers and drama students in the same room. How do we make this count for the credits for graduation? It didn't. It wasn't impacted by their work wasn't graded. They were doing it because they did what interested them and whatever level of intensity interested them to engage with it. Spent a few years in industry, went off to grad school, started another club because it's the only thing I know how to do with my life. Another 200 games got made. That still kept going ever since. Around the time I was starting my PhD to become an educator, I was hearing from a lot of people in our groups that they were going on to have a better job with their portfolio, to have a better time making games, even if they weren't in game industry. It just helped them out in a lot of ways. So I wanted to center my life around doing that. And again, this is one of those things where what drew me to graduate school was actually wanting to make educational games to help explain things and help people understand concepts. And while I'd spend semesters making a thing that someone could kind of explain the idea of in a few sentences, on the side, people were learning trigonometry to make their cars explode better. Right? They were learning all kinds of creative skills that were outside the bounds of what they do professionally. They were picking up, to be blunt, socializing skills that otherwise were going to not be a part of their life because it made better games, and that was a driver for them to grow in ways helpful throughout their life. So that's been my main work the past decade plus. Currently it's called DevPodGG. We've rebranded every few years for a variety of reasons, but the gold pins where we've had projects led from, blue pins we've had contributors from, released 233 free games, all 2 to 6 months, anywhere from as few as 4 to as many as, say, 15 in development in parallel. All of our games have incredibly specific credits, which I show partly as an indication of the disproportionate, unequal contributions, and that's fine, right? It's not like, oh, it has to be an even split because all programmers are all artists. Some people treat it like a varsity sport and throw a lot of time at it. Some people show up once or twice a month and toss an icon over the wall. It's valid. It has a place in their life. It's different. I'm going to be plucking a few different books out that, to me, help connect these thoughts across time, in part because these are not new problems. These are not new solutions. We are just better equipped today through game making to support some of this in the shape of the ecosystem long ago. So in this case, literally a century ago, Bertrand Russell, Education of the Good Life. I was going to shorten this, and I thought it'd be disrespectful to Mr. Russell. In the newer universities, there's a regrettable tendency to insist upon attendance at innumerable lectures. When I was an undergraduate, my feeling, and that of most of my friends, was that lectures were a pure waste of time. The real reason for lectures is that they are obvious work, and therefore businessmen are willing to pay for them. If university teachers adopted the best methods, businessmen would think them idle and insist upon cutting down the staff. He should see the pupils individually when they have done their papers, about once a week or once a fortnight. He should see such as care to come in the evening and have desultory conversation about matters more or less connected to their work. If a pupil chooses to set himself a paper different from that of the teacher but equally difficult, he should be at liberty to do so. Right? They should be able to pick what they want to do. They should only catch up maybe once every week or two. And the lectures, we do it because people understand how to buy that. They can picture in their brain that that's a thing I pay for. It's a bit like when we get these conferences like GDC, the lectures are not the point. And I say that as someone giving a lecture out of it. But like, it's the people that gets in the same room together, right? It's that you got a room full of people making shaders, a room full of lawyers in game industry, a room full of journalists discussing things. That's the value. It's not quite a trick. But like when I was planning Indicade, our thinking was the talks aren't kind of the point. They're a means to getting people together. So my argument for the way to teach in my position is sort of like to not teach, sort of like, so kind of borrow this old office line, what's the safest way to go skiing, don't ski. It's not quite that simple, but you get the feeling of it. And I did adapt this to Northeastern University. I taught 4 classes there a couple years ago. 2 of them were related to adapting this model to a classroom setting. If there are conventional educators in the room who are curious about how we adapt something that is ungraded to something that has to have grades for administrative reasons, I can talk about how I fit that in that structure, but I know it's not everyone's kind of question. Here's our 15 principles we're going through throughout the talk. They'll each get their own time, so I'm not going to read through the whole slide. But self-direction or autonomy or agency is incredibly important, right? If someone is pursuing that they're developing the artistic side of themselves, the technical side of themselves, design process thinking, project leadership, whatever it is, giving people the option to do what interests them, and the shape this takes in our community is relatively extreme, in the meaning that people are not stuck to teams or roles. And I think this is an essential part of it working, where someone can safely, I try out being part of this team project. If I don't like it, I just wander over to another project. And everyone in the group knows, like, this is the vibe. This is, you're not doing something wrong, you're not leaving people on the hook. That's the nature of it, they float around. Last week I did sound effects on this thing. I decided I don't like doing sound effects. I'm writing code next week on something else. And it's fine, everyone's chill. And I think it's important because it enables them to explore their interests without having to put themselves on a long-term track saying, I am definitely an artist on this Unreal game. Oh my God, what have I got myself into? I regret it, I have negative feelings about it. Totally unnecessary. Again, these are not commercial projects, so it's not a problem. Make it stick, the science of successful learning. This one's only 10, 12 years ago, God. Learning is deeper and more durable when it's effortful. Periodic practice arrests forgetting, strengthens retrieval routes, and is essential for hanging on to the knowledge you want to gain. When you space out practice at a task and get a little rusty between sessions, and you interleave practice of 2 or more subjects, retrieval is harder and feels less productive, but the effort produces longer lasting learning and enables more versatile applications of it in later settings. Which is to say, while it sounds unfocused, that there's scattering between different types of tasks and different types of engines, different types of games, in many ways it's actually binding that learning together. It's giving them a chance to forget and relearn, to see it in different patterns, to learn the bigger picture of when I made sounds on this project, how to hook it up in another game in a different engine, and it helps us connect these pieces in a way if we're living in a hyper-specialized place, which professionally in industrial roles, that's necessary, and a learning environment, there are advantages to letting them slop it up. We have fixed release dates. Everything that starts in our groups announces the release date. This originated from when we had college clubs. At the end of the semester, people were just scattering like cockroaches. We had to release before summertime, before the final period or whatever. In our current groups, when they start 2 to 6 months later, say, here's the date we're releasing the best version we can by. Now, there's no crunch around it because they can just cut scope to get a version out. They also do post-release updates. So I swept some things under the rug for an initial release, and then a few weeks later, added a couple things in that were kind of not quite ready to share. This is so important because without it, the learning isn't really project-based because there's no project. And this is where a lot of people who are making games out there, especially if they're like, well, I'm not commercial, I don't have a burn rate. Why worry about it? They have a burn rate, it's their level of interest and attention that is fading. And if they don't get a game out before their interest fades on it, they just have regrets. And then it holds them back from wanting to start the next thing. It discourages them. They feel like they've broken a promise to themselves and they're not going to get themselves set up again. Because we always have a release date, even if the version of the release is not quite what they had dreamed about or had in their vision when they kicked it off. In many cases, we have people who release a game, a few weeks later, kick off another, because they know, I feel like this project is worth 4 months of my life, I can give it that time, and that is when it will come out. Authentic audience is an idea from educational theory where it's basically, they're not doing it for me as a teacher, they're not doing it for a manager or a boss, they're doing it for whoever they care to impress. So for some of them, it's players. They want players to take an interest in, comment, or engage. For a lot of them, it's their peers. I want my friends and family to think this is cool. That's valid. In other cases, it is industrial. They're trying to get a job somewhere. They need to impress a recruiter, in which case their lens on it as a recruiter is probably different from mine. What's important to me, as I've already established, is people are learning and developing and growing, and HR does not care. Recruiters want to know, can you do the thing we're hiring for? In which case, let that person focus on what is best for the portfolio, even if it's at odds with, kind of wish they would diversify their learning skill set. They don't. Let them do their thing. This is what helps us tap into our own intrinsic motivation or our own guidance for what I think, who I care to impress, leads us down different paths that are still compatible in a team project. The ungraded or result is the great effect. And we actually heard this kind of rhythm from game jams for years. I'm not giving anyone a 7 or a 10. I'm not giving anyone an A or a B. They meant to do a thing. Here's the thing they did. How do they feel about it? And this is so important because in many cases, the goal is not to do the best game they can. Right? So let's say I'm a great programmer. I've spent 20 years doing it. I'm trying to get better at Blender. That's my goal. Maybe I do some terrible Blender models. Success. I did what I meant to do, as opposed to I retreated to the thing I'm already good at. Let's say I've been making a lot of platformers. I'm pretty good at that. I really want to make a puzzle game because I haven't. The puzzle game sucks. Doesn't matter. My goal was to stretch and diversify myself in a way that, again, if I had to assess an objective quality, like, you should have steered towards what you already know how to do. The world is already shaped that way for grown-ups. There's already, sorry, my degree is in this, sorry, my 10 years experience is in that. That's the job I can get. I'm not allowed to get outside my pigeonhole or my lane. These are freeware projects. Who gives a damn? Let them do their terrible first Blender model. Let them do their terrible first sound effect. It's freeware. It doesn't matter. The freeware is also important for the longer runway. In many cases, people who try to do the solo indie or the other kind of stuff quit because they run out of funding, they run out of savings, it just drags out, it takes too long with solo stuff. It allows them to have a mistake and recover from it. And what winds up happening without the freeware effect is that people only know how to make a game in a way that they have a finite runway on, and we'll say like, oh, at least lesson learned, like we learned something from it, but then people get fired or companies shut down or they got to go back to the full-time something else and kind of give up the dream because they don't know how to do it sustainably without a burn rate, cutting their savings and such. This comes to us from Flow, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Many people in the room already know this book. I think some people oversimplify or miss a key point we're going to focus on here. I believe it's 1990 originally. To overcome the anxieties and depressions of contemporary life, individuals must become independent of the social environment to the degree that they no longer respond exclusively in terms of its rewards or punishments. To achieve such autonomy, a person has to learn to provide rewards to herself. She has to develop the ability to find enjoyment and purpose regardless of external circumstances. The best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. When we act freely for the sake of the action, emphasis added by me, rather than for ulterior motives, we learn to become more than what we were. And again, my goal is primarily help people become more than what they were in whatever direction that means to them, which may be at odds with my own priorities. I think some of the times the reason that interests me, right, is often people talk about flow, they use it for like adaptive difficulty. The whole point of this clip is that like external rewards and punishments aren't it, bro, which feels like something important got missed in how people use this. Safety to make mistakes, freedom to try what doesn't pan out. This is again, so in the learning context, when I adapted this Northeastern, one of the challenges of teaching in university stuff is you've got to grade stuff. And people will try a thing, they'll swing for the fences, ooh, that did not work out. Typically, you've got to penalize that and be like, it's a safe environment to fail, but you still failed. There's a very real thing that happens in that context if you're not careful. So like my workaround for that when I had to adapt it to university was we basically graded process. Did you follow the steps? Did you do the things? Did you call your shots of what you're trying to do for your team? Are you supporting the teammates around you? And their goals may be more or less ambitious. Ultimately, their main grade was, again, just helpful in their path in life, which could be the portfolio. It could be their art tour independent projects, whatever they're after. But in our groups, again, it's basically everyone knows we might fumble over ourselves, but it's fine. It's a workshop. We're there to learn. It's a makerspace kind of attitude. It's not just about the end product. Giving them that safety to make mistakes. I learned this idea from James Paul G. Is excellent with video games have to teach us about learning and literacy. The original edition, 2003. He was actually just echoing Erik Erikson's 1968 theory. Video games create what the psychologist Erik Erikson has called a psychosocial moratorium. That is a learning space in which a learner can take risks where real-world consequences are lowered. Typically, this is the shape of things that people focus on during adolescence. When they're in high school, when they're an undergraduate, part of the thing that college does that's separate from the transmission of career knowledge is a space for making mistakes that are more recoverable. That's part of its function in society that, for better or for worse, we often overlook. Part of what I like about this, making games remotely, on teams, etc., few hours a week in many people's cases, it gives an opportunity for this in adulthood. When otherwise I feel, again, like I'm locked into the path that I'm on, it gives people who are in their 30s and their 40s and their 50s onward a chance to keep growing, keep trying new things, actually, I really like Blender modeling, and I never really had a chance for that to fit in my life before, and it may never become my career, but I love doing it, and it's a part now of who I am. Aligning to interests, this again letting people chase their curiosity, and this is a thing that changes. This is also back to why we let people freely switch between projects, choose their own teams, pick their own tasks, so they can guess. So they don't have to try to make big bets on it. And any given time, we've seen shifts of they thought they were interested in action games, they pursued it, now they're interested in strategy. They thought they would do Unreal, regrets were had, now they're over in Godot and they're much happier. But it's a space where people can match up what they want to do, and if you don't do this, if you assign them teams, if you tell them what to do, a lot of us in STEM, in general, this is an overgeneralization if you'll bear with me, have a version of pathological demand avoidance. If we're told what to do, we're less interested in doing it, even if we otherwise were going to do it. Letting people have the freedom to pick what matches their interests, to explore that freely, I think is essential to finding, again, our own motivations as opposed to being pushed along to do it. Educational Writings of John Locke. The reason I read this book was because of John Locke, but actually the part I'm quoting is from the editor, John William Adamson. I think he summed it up in a much more modern sense. Granted, he had an advantage of being a century ago and not centuries ago. Not amusement or distraction, but the desire to effect some cherished purpose is the strongest motive that can move the learner. And I love this. I think this is like the one key thought of project-based learning, right? It is, I want to achieve an outcome. Between me and able to do that, I need to grow, I need to learn something, I got to go overcome my hang-ups, I got to become different somehow in what I can learn how to do. This is one of the things I'm super angry about AI potentially trying to take away from people. A sense of like, no, you don't need to learn the skill. Let us worry about the skill for you. We'll just make sure that it kind of gets done. And I have a lot of, and this is even before the AI wave, companies that approach me at GDC and other stuff, like, hey, we got this new thing. Now they don't have to learn GitHub. I'm like, I want them to learn GitHub. Now they don't have to write code. I want them to learn how to write code. They don't have to use Photoshop. Please let them learn to use Photoshop. It's like approaching a basketball coach and be like, now your athletes don't have to run back and forth. They're getting conditioned or practice or show up. And I'm like, what the hell are we doing? We want to focus on what's best for the person, not the game. This is one of these things that from the outside can be invisible, but is incredibly important to what we're doing working. A lot of people don't realize until they stumble into their first career opportunities that this is not the shape of the adult world and industry. As again, it can't be, and that's fair. So for example, early in my career, I was on the Medal of Honor team. Let's pull up the little diagram here. EAL had a lot of projects going on parallel. Rogue Agent had already shipped. That was not my fault. I was on the Medal of Honor team. They wanted to move me over to Command & Conquer franchise. I liked when I was growing up. I didn't like what they were doing with it more recently. I really wanted to go to Boom Blocks. And that took a lot of haggling and fighting to try to steer my way towards this is better for my career path. It's like a creative project that appeals to kids. These other projects are a little more kind of adult properties, which is fine, but I'm a teacher kind of at heart. I like the puzzle space. I like the things about this genre. The thing that was best for my career was a fight as opposed to what the studio can exist to do. I understand they respect their priorities have to be what's best in the big picture for the users. This also includes in our hobby games. If I just want to learn sounds, I can just learn sounds. Over here, we've got hyper-specialized people. So there's a guy who is like hand animator for first-person camera stuff, right? He's the hands doing the gun reloads and stuff. Someone else wants to learn that? No, he needs to be doing that. He's the best in the world at it. He wants to do something else? Actually, sorry, we need you animating hands. The shape of the world requires what's best for the game. This also results, and this is when I say things like the games kind of aren't our point. They're a means to an end. They're a byproduct. Our games wind up worse because of the decisions that we make to prioritize. So let's say someone comes in, they're like, actually, I'm really good at making robots, and that would be helping my portfolio to show that off. It might be a bit of a stretch. Like, we're not going to put it in a fantasy game, but we'll find some way to work it in somewhere because it helps that person, even if the game, again, is like, well, not going to be as appealing to fans. It's not mainly who it's for, it's the people who are making it and how it serves them. The project requiring growth to finish it. Now, this is not technically required for everybody. There are people who just happily, this is an activity they do, like knitting. It's just satisfying to make pixel art. I don't care to get better at it. Fine, that's a place in life, that's a valid. Other folks, what happens is if they just tread water, they release their 5th game, their 6th game, their 7th game they've led, and they feel like they've plateaued. They feel like they've stopped learning. Now, of course, anyone here making games at a serious level knows like that's rubbish. You can infinitely fall down any given rabbit hole and dedicate your life to shaders or to like optimization in the Unreal pipeline or anything else. You can become a hyper specialist in proprietary rigging techniques or otherwise. And so what I try to always encourage people is kind of this 85% mindset of taking on projects or tasks. I'm 85% sure I know how to finish. 15% is a good amount of buffer. Like, I can figure it out. I can fumble my way through. I can trial and error. I can ask for help. I'm not totally overwhelmed by it, but I'm also not just going through the motions of doing stuff I already know how to do. Making another breakout, making another Flappy Bird, which was fine, but we want to keep building on that. There are 3 different directions people stretch in. I recently gave another talk about this about a month ago. The video for that just went up yesterday for anybody looking for it. It was my upload of it. But the 3 different directions are for their learning. That's kind of the most obvious. You know, I want to learn how to make 3D models. Now I will. I want to know how to use Unreal. Now I'm functionally fluent. Demonstrating is different than learning, and that has the shape of I'm already pretty good at this, but the world doesn't believe me. I can't get the job because I haven't shown off I can do it. And this is someone, for example, maybe they went to school, they have a certain set of skills, the shape of projects that they found their way through going through grad school or undergrad or whatever, didn't let them flex the thing that they're really, really excited about. They want to demonstrate that. Again, it's very different from learning. They may not have as much to learn at this scale about the thing they're showing off. Positioning is, again, they all kind of overlap a little bit. This one actually has more to do with people who they've got a dream game in mind. And part of why they haven't taken it on yet is that they don't feel like they're the right person to tackle it. They're unqualified. They don't have the experience yet. They would muddle it up with a beginner error. So positioning is stepping stone-wise, moving themselves closer and closer until I'm the best person to be doing this project because I've got the background I do from the projects I've taken on. It's shifting them forward until they can get to a point where the game they want to take on, they're ready for. These are Gabriel Adamaster Demotis illustrations I commissioned for this kind of idea. Again, the whole other talk's on YouTube if you're looking for that. 3 reasons people make games. But the positioning is increasing their options for future projects. Demonstrating is showing off what they can do to impress others. Learning is enjoying the experience of practicing and doing it. And part I like about these kind of freeware, remote, distributed teams for people to bounce around freely, all three of these are part of the ecosystem. And if you only had one or the other, minus the others, it kind of falls apart. The people who really, there's the positioning stuff, are most likely to be projects. Without projects being led, there's not much for the people to attach to. The demonstrating people really carry a lot of the other work. Otherwise, it's too much work for the positioning leading types. And the learning people will fill in gaps and cracks in a way the demonstrating person is hyper-specialized, positioning person is kind of already spread thin, but the learning person will just try things out for the variety of it. They're all necessary in the ecosystem. Kavanaugh, I swear it's not that one. A Tale, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, a while ago. And hey, Boston published. We judge ourselves by what we feel capable of doing, while others judge us by what we've already done. When I first started presenting some of these ideas, I want to say 17 years ago, some people in the room were kind of like, okay, so at the time when I was presenting it was, you should start with some pretty basic games, make some remakes of Pong and Breakout, etc. It's also pre-engine, the world was a very different shape. And then work your way up kind of through history as a way to kind of scope control and incrementally advance your stuff and whatever. And one guy's attitude is, well, that's really easy for me, so why should I do it? And I was like, well, one thing is until you've done it, no one else believes you that it'd be easy for you. And if it's easy for you, knock it out. And by Monday, people will believe you, right? There's the other side effect of this. Even if we're capable of doing it, when we're on the other side of having done it, we are now adjacent to more things that we're capable of doing than we were before. So it's still valuable to go through that process. But the usual motivation for the demonstration lens is, I need the outside world to believe me. And it's one of our common puzzles for games is the catch-22 of, I don't have experience, how am I supposed to get experience? Finding a way to show I can do the thing because I've done the thing takes away this question of, well, then why haven't you if you could? Learning materials are used to overcome obstacles. This one I'm all being careful about because it can feel a little anti-intellectual. I don't believe it is. Rather than having a bunch of assigned readings, rather than having assigned lectures, rather than telling people, soak up all these ideas in case they're useful to you, which was the shape of the world pre-internet in a lot of other fields. Instead, it's so direct to find the thing about the stuff. So that's pretty vague. Let's say someone in our group is making a platformer. They can tell my platformer character's jump feels kind of floaty and off and weird. It's kind of stupid for reasons hard to put a finger on. And so they mention that in the group. And someone else says, oh, you should check out, I don't have an illustration for this one, Game Feel by Steve Swink. It's my favorite book about game design. I should have made an illustration for it. I didn't. They look up Game Feel by Steve Swink. They find a whole chapter about Mario's jump and why it's tuned and why it's implemented the way that it is and how that function relates to being able to land on platforms and land on Goombas and how they can reproduce that. Now, they might not want exactly the Mario jump, but they ran into an obstacle for which they found material that is the answer to overcome it. This is the shape of how graduate researcher kind of people approach materials, right? The part of my reading list when I was doing my master's thesis was I had questions about pinball that were not being assigned for me to read by classes, so I'd go and read those books. This is Walden. This is my copy. It's in front of the arcade rug. I think a lot of people misunderstand this book. That's a whole talk for another day. I think they don't pay enough attention to the first chapter. Expansion, this is, of course, 1854, which means when he says expense, adjusting for inflation, the whole thing's very stupid. Expense of getting an education would in great measure vanish those conveniences for which a student requires at Cambridge or elsewhere cost him or somebody else 10 times as great a sacrifice of life. Those things for which the most money is demanded are never the things which a student most wants. Tuition, for instance, is an important item in the term bill, while the form of valuable education which he gets by associating with the most cultivated contemporaries, no charge is made. Says one, you do not mean that the student should go to work with their hands instead of their heads. I do not mean that exactly, but I mean something which he might think a good deal like that. Which would have advanced the most at the end of the month? The boy who had made his own jackknife from the ore which he had dug and smelted, reading as much as would be necessary for this, or the boy who had attended the lectures on metallurgy at the Institute, at the meanwhile, and had received a Rogers penknife from his father, which would be most likely to cut his fingers. Now, this doesn't fit every single field as well. Surgeons aren't going to learn this way. Bridge builders can't learn this way. But for games in digital space, we have opportunities here that were harder then to just learn by messing around, to learn by building things, to learn by making stuff, to let that guide what we're reading. And I choose him and I choose Russell, etc., because this is not an anti-intellectual person. It's an educated person, wrote some classic American literature, lived down the street from here. But still the lens is, well, let us guide our reading which would be necessary for doing the task in front of us, and then it sticks. It stays with us. We have context for it. Ability scaling to skip gatekeeping. What are the biggest challenges we have in the early pipeline for game development is, again, this catch-22 I alluded to earlier of I don't have enough experience in level design for someone to let me get experience doing level design. I'm not a good enough programmer for someone to let me be a programmer. What do? And so they're off struggling on their lonesome on their own. Ability scaling, what this means is, so for example, our project leads, which people would assume is like a senior position. You work your way up, you get plucked for it or whatever. Hell no. Anybody in our group who wants to be a project lead can. We just scale accordingly. So let's say someone has never used Godot. They want to learn Godot. They find a Godot tutorial. In fact, they've bookmarked it years ago. They've been meaning to watch it. They haven't. Well, if we just paste that over to a 2 to 6 month schedule of watching the next videos in the Godot tutorial, and then they put a few tweaks and personalizations on, but mine's an alligator, and I don't know, is it a time travel background or whatever, by August, they have gone through the tutorial, they've learned Godot, and we've just scaled the complexity accordingly so that they weren't getting themselves and their teammates into trouble. This applies across the board. If they're new to doing 2D pixel art, is there like an icon somewhere they can find that's the right fit for them? That, again, because they don't have to be the whole main artist, because they're not, remember, the credits are all very specific. We say exactly who did what. They don't feel like they're inappropriately represented as one of the 3 artists on the team. It's pretty clear, like, Jan only did that vase. That's all she did for the project, and that's fine. But it allows us to knock down that wall of the gatekeeping stuff that, again, keeps some people out of feeling like, well, I'm not ready for teams. I'm not ready to lead. I'm not ready to do the thing I want to do. We can find a way to scale that. Slightly adapted, actually, a little, believe it or not, got this off CrossFit, which much people associate with like crazy intensity. Part of their philosophy is scaling. So older folks, younger folks, people who are less physically able still participate in the things. Teammates raising our standards could very much be a whole talk in itself. The social effect is significant. So much so I give a whole those 5 bullet points. We do our best work when it affects others. So many of us kind of care more about other people than ourselves. We could dig through that another day about what's going on there, but it's very real. And a lot of people who wind up in my community, it's their first time writing code other people are going to look at. They immediately put a tie on, right? It's the first time they're doing Blender models someone else might open, they start naming their objects for the first time in their life. It's the first time they're in a Unity project or Godot project that other people are going to get off the repo. They like organize their hierarchy and put some labels and stuff because they want to like make it look nice for others. Now this helps us too, right? Articulating, clarifying, organizing, labeling stuff. It helps us too, but we do it because it's going to affect others. It raises our standards for ourselves when other people are involved. This also includes getting over our hangups. So there's various versions of this that it takes. One of the most significant is perfectionism. And again, if it's just screwing up me because I'm dragging my feet for 4 months on like what color should my like UI health bar be or whatever, that's one thing. If there are 8 other people contributing to this project and it is, we told them we're going to release the best version we can by June, I'm just going to pick a color and you got to think big picture. I got to zoom out. I got to get over my perfectionism. This is a gentler version. This is me speculating. I know less about it because I'm not a parent. What I feel like I've observed from parents who got their act together when their life needed them to because suddenly they weren't only affecting themselves, right? Their decisions also affect someone else they care about. And when we have teammates we care about, it helps us. We zoom out and it stops getting us in our heads and looking at what affects the teammates. How do I got to adjust or grow or change or have some scary video calls with people who were strangers because it's going to help the whole thing go better for all of us, which again ultimately makes it go better for us as well. It's important to me we don't let outside assets or AI take seats from people. Before AI, this was basically our outside asset policy. Now, like, I love Kenny. I'm not anti any of that going on. There's a place for that. Game jams are good for that. There's places, people want to totally solo, learning stages, all good. In our case, we need each other only if we're not replacing the whole for someone else with something else we find on the internet, if that makes sense. So because I've dedicated more of my time to programming, I can't do as efficiently or as well some of the visuals, for example. And if I just plug in a bunch of stuff I find, that fills up someone else's space. Or if I grab some songs from Kevin MacLeod, and I like his stuff, Compotech's a good source, but then the musician is kind of left out in the cold of, hey, I kind of wish we had a chance to interact over that. And part of what's so great about working with other people, especially as, again, AI keeps trying to sell us this fantasy of you don't need other people, is the idea that when you ask another person for something, they don't give you exactly what you asked for like AI did. They're like, actually, well, if you consider doing this instead, and you're like, oh my God, that's so much better. I would not have occurred to me to do it that way, or I hadn't seen it that way. I didn't have the vocabulary to describe in music the thing you've chosen to do. Great. And again, it's also going to play into their interests, having the motivation. You get a much more chaotic, effective outcomes that take in new directions than if you just lived in your own little island of thinking you know everything is the way it needs to be. So I'm strong argument against that. No, it doesn't mean that there are still people, for example, in our group who I know don't love it. The world's changing. They're using AI to like troubleshoot on the side or like asking it questions to brainstorm. We're not a pure 0%. We can't promise none of it's happening anywhere, but we don't use it to replace people, if that makes sense. It's a key distinction we try to make. Peers as an audience. One of the things that happens for a lot of people making their own games, it's lonely. That sucks, right? They're kind of they do stuff and no one's listening. They put up their screenshot on Twitter, no one's looking at it. They put their song up, no one's listening to it. They make art, no one's really cheering for them. When you got teammates, you have people paying attention. And it's also one of the reasons, again, back to this point of it's so critical to our group. People are freely drifting between projects. If you're in like a college group project, and then let's say there's presentations going up, you're not even up on there. You've got 2 people out of your 6-person team in your class giving a presentation. You pay the most attention to the one you worked on. You have the context for it, right? You're invested in it. When people are freely jumping between teams, every project is either one they've already been involved on or when they still could be. and they have a reason to clue in and pay attention because next week I might be part of that team. I'm kind of curious what's going on. Leads to us celebrating and paying attention to the song you did, the iteration of the art you're doing, all the bits and pieces you're doing. You've got peers who also understand the complexities, the time limitations, the constraints, the freewareness of it. In a way, when you show it to your friends and family who don't make games, they're like, this doesn't hold a candle to the $600,000 budget game I just bought off Steam, which is true. But it keeps us from being isolated. I think if you're lonely making games, I would argue, from my perspective, you're doing it wrong. You should be working with other people, finding a way to do it. If it's not my group, finding some way to do it. It also fosters incremental course correction. This is where we don't want to ever happen is somebody says, okay, well, it's a cool game you've got going, the helicopter or whatever. I'm going to disappear for 4 weeks, come back and give you the final music, whole soundtrack ready. Or I made all your environment art, boom, there it is. It gives us a reason to show, hey, here's my process, right? Here's my first stage. I got some screenshots, got a sketch, got a 5 seconds to tell what you're going for, some back and forth. Helps us collaborate more closely, helps us communicate and get to know each other better, helps us learn from other people's insights and perspectives, and improves our work. Also, as a byproduct of that, when people later on figure out maybe they weren't doing this for portfolio reasons, now they want it for portfolio reasons, they have snapshots in the GitHub or the Discord or otherwise to show their process. And it's a much stronger case for them. But it helps us course correct as we go, which again improves our learning from outside perspectives. And originally, only earlier this year, so Noah Wizard, a guy on the Shadowtail team, referred to our group as kind of like community theater vibes. In a way, I didn't do community theater, so that didn't register for me. But more recently, Mark Gwynn, another guy also on Shadowtail, referred to it as improv energy, which that I understand because I've seen enough of this show. And in particular, the yes and effect of someone else brings up something of like, hey, what if we did this bananas thing? And as long as that person wants to carry the bananas, sure, go for it. Great. And that energy allowing to play off of each other leads to other people kind of riffing on it, having ideas, not feeling shut down, out of which we go back to the earlier point of what is good for the people, not good for the game. In a commercial studio, I'm not going to use this guy's name, a designer was very, very burnt out from how everything was a knife fight to convince other people on the team that this is a thing worth even trying. Can we just try it? Can we give half a day just to see it? And it took his toll. He exited forever from games. We don't want that effect. We want, hey, let's try it. Again, because we're freeware, we can. We don't have to do what's best for the end product. At the end of the day, it still winds up coming out much better than it would have if we were either on our lonesome or not able to kind of just run with our ideas. Falling riches. Punished by rewards, Alfie Cohn. Big fan of this guy. I found him through Chris Hecker's talk 16 years ago about achievements, back when that was a new thing. Is that messing up when people play games? Was kind of the Chris Hecker angle. It's a great talk, worth looking up. Learning is decontextualized. We break ideas down into tiny pieces that bear no relation to the whole. We give students a brick of information, followed by another brick, followed by another brick, until they're graduated. At which point, we assume they have a house. What they have is a pile of bricks, and they don't have it for long. More and more teachers are coming to recognize that excellence is most likely a result from well-functioning teams, in which resources are shared, skills and knowledge are exchanged, and each participant is encouraged and helped to do their best. And I think this is one of the things that it's again like, we can hear this, and having tried teaching within the conventional educational pathways, there are all kinds of systemic, real challenges of making this fit in a normal learning context. That's real. None of this is ever blaming like teachers should do this. A lot of them know, and they're frustrated because they can't, because they're not allowed. It's difficult to structure into the environments. In adulthood, in freeware projects, and side stuff, nothing stops us from trying these kind of theories that before are like, oh, we wish we could all go this direction. There's reasons why it doesn't help them pass the SATs. Things are real. Seeking help is a best practice for a lot of us. Certainly my experience going K through 12, and I don't think this is the artifact of Northern Missouri schooling system. If someone got a tutor, it's not like stigmatized to be an overstatement, but there's an assumption you did something wrong. Like you were supposed to not need that. It's kind of a remedial, like, oh, if you had paid attention, if you had just done the work. As opposed to destigmatizing and saying, like, seeking help is a healthy practice. That is the way you're supposed to do this. And I think also even in undergrad, it kind of got programmed into us. If you ask other comp sci students about the assignment, you're cheating. You got to report that to you. You get in trouble now. As opposed to in adulthood, we're often taking on challenges that are new to us, that are outside our bounds what we know so far. Learning to ask for help from others as a best practice is an important part of us being able to do it, getting outside of our heads, not being stuck. This enables a much deeper dive. Again, this whole idea of chasing their interest, pursuing it. When they open up a thread that they're doing, other people can then engage with them, like, oh, I have other thoughts and perspectives and things I've learned about that, and then it helps them reinforce the direction they were already going in a way others would not have known to provide if someone didn't ask the question. It allows people to learn by teaching. This is one of those things where we can teach something, it helps us solidify our own learning. I think most of us have seen this in our own life. Having to explain to someone else, to articulate and solidify, and even start to question some stuff I thought I knew. When I explained it, I realized I know differently than I thought I did. It's also easier to tell that we're improving. One of the challenges when we don't have grades, we don't have advancing through the system, of you're not now in grade 12 or 13 or whatever, is it can kind of feel like, well, if as long as I keep taking on things that are 85% what I'm ready to do, I don't feel like I'm advancing. Until at one point what I notice is someone asks a question and I answer it that I asked 2 years ago, and now I'm the person who answers it. Like Mikey was the person who I needed help from, and now I'm someone else's Mikey. That feels pretty good. I can feel and see myself growing and learning. Asking for help is also an essential leadership skill. I've had to assess over these groups, hundreds of people, to be like, can they be trusted with a bunch of strangers' time? And one of the key things is, can they ask for help if they're stuck? If they can't, they cannot be trusted with the time of others. But if they can ask for help, they're unstoppable. Because what happens if someone cannot ask others for help, they will ghost, they will spiral, they will vanish the first time they can't solve something themselves. If they will ask for help, it doesn't matter how non-advanced they are, we can get them through it because they will not just vanish. We have a human help channel. I don't need to mention who because this is a good person in our community. He's a smart guy, but it used to be called the help channel. Then someone posted a programming question. He said, oh, here's what Cloud said about it. If someone wanted Cloud's answer, then go ask Cloud, right? If they want GPT, they can type that in. They can Google it themselves. We have a bid for connection when we ask questions. People helping each other has social and developmental value. It's a co-op game that we're playing together. And again, this version of a bit like when you ask AI for an art asset, maybe even if ideally if it works, if you get back what you wanted, it's not as good as asking a person and finding that there's more to it that you didn't even know to ask for. Often when we ask other human beings with a human answer, there's like, okay, well, I can answer that question, but there's also maybe another question you might want to be asking around that comes from engaging with other people. It's a bit like saying, who's up to play this game with me? And they say, here's a bot you can download. What are we doing? Right? What are we doing? That's not kind. People keeping ownership is essential to how our group functions. In a traditional studio, again, for valid commercial reasons, they have to own all the stuff you do. They got to be able to distribute it. They got to be able to resell it. They got to be able to publisher deals. Oh, it's a whole thing that makes sense. In our group, we've had musicians make stuff in our games and then put it up on Bandcamp and charge for it, put it up on iTunes and charge for it. If it's their music, no one else can do that. They can do that. They can use it in future projects, etc. Same thing for their art that they use. Same thing for their code. Now, programmers are often a little less particular or ownery about it. They're it's just sitting there in the public repos and we can look at it. But if they say write some sort of custom tool that helps them, there's a sort of custom proprietary-ish approach to a problem that keeps occurring to them, they can use that in the future projects. If anyone else wanted to, they'd have to have a discussion with that person. Do you want to buy your rights? Are you cool with it? Is it okay with you? But people keep their own respective stuff. All we really have is a context that fits all of their own stuff together. There's a bunch of reasons why that's important. The first of which, it avoids exploitation or replacing workers. It avoids some clown showing up thinking that instead of paying contractors, he's going to have a bunch of people make it for him for free because he can't sell it because he owns none of it, right? He just can't. It's a minefield. And someone complained about this and was like, yeah, you're who we're trying to worry about. Go away. You're not a fit for what's going on here. Nothing's hidden behind an NDA. We've had people in our groups who joined because they've worked on like 13 years of games commercially. Nothing ever shipped because it's the game industry. They have nothing they can show because it's all NDA. That sucks. As soon as they're working on it, they can show it, they can share it, they can do whatever they want with it. It's theirs after release. It's theirs to show however they want. Use it in a way that helps them. The only limitation we ask is to not put it behind an exclusive license. So if I take a song I did for one of these games, Crazy Arena Chaos, for example, and then I try to make an exclusive deal so the Petco company can use it for a commercial, and I'm like, oh, it won't be used anywhere else. We got to go rip it out of the repo and rebuild for the portfolios and it tears things up. So we just ask, please don't do that. If something that came up, we would do it. But we ask people, please don't do that. It also leads to more experienced peers. So I've been doing this since 1997. I don't participate in free projects if other people own my work. That would be ludicrous. We have people who've made songs and music they have sold professionally to Steam games who also make music in our groups because they own their own stuff. You can actually have more experienced and more advanced teammates when they own their own work because, again, they know that they're not giving away anything of value. They're doing it for themselves. It's still valuable in the portfolio. It's helping them on the mission that they're on. It's all theirs. Avoiding wasting work is an incredibly important part to make sure that people are not losing morale and quitting. One of the worst things that can happen, and that's why from the very first semester of the College Club in 2004, we put a stop to this. If people work on a game and that game does not come out, they're unlikely to work on another game in many cases. It's such a morale hit. We've had people in our groups who they joined game jams. The game jam didn't ship. And still they were like, oh, hurts, right? I made a song for him, it doesn't exist. So we use what we can. We put it out there. It's again, like we talked about earlier, high school athletics. The goal is not to be on the bench. It's back to if it's a professional studio, you absolutely have to edit things out. This level's not as good, this song isn't as good, this art isn't as good, we've got to replace you. That can't be how this works. We use what we can. We had a game with some mechs and someone made a robot that was not even modeled in the way we could articulate or rig. We made like a statue in the background out of it. And we were like, it's there. But someone does a song, and the song, they want it to be the gameplay loop, but this cannot be our gameplay loop. It's not going to, people aren't going to play the rest of it. It's our pause music, right? It's like, well, we need a song for the credits, so we'll find a way to scroll it away over here. We'll put a radio dial, you can change the song on the option screen, including everything we can. There's exceptions, but where we can, we include it. This is also why we tend to build in level select or simple cheat code options. The thing people often don't think about is they're used to playing games where you beat level 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. It's really, really hard, and it's a different shape of wasted work. If I made the song for the level 3 boss, if I did level design for level 6, and level 1's too hard because it's also by an amateur level designer, I can't easily tell people, oh, you just got to get 30 minutes into the game. You just got to kind of beat your way to level 3. Give them a level select option, give them a cheat code, then they can show it to their friends, family, recruiters. Avoids a scenario of like, I'm not even sure if my thing made it in the game because I can't get to that stage because, again, amateur level design, amateur programming, it's fine. But one reason why, design-wise, that approach is part of not wasting work. It's not just including it, it's including a way to get to it. So those are 15 points. We can hop back to any of those during questions if people have them. I don't think I need to go back through the whole idea of all of them. Again, we got slides too. I will say, so when I mentioned the games aren't really the point, we only recently have started this kind of lens on things. We're trying to better tell the story of the effect that has on the people. Shadow Tale is a game that just released from our group recently, actually 2-3 games ago. We kind of interviewed 6 different people on the team about how it was relevant or useful for them. Like 2/3 of them are pure hobbyists who have no interest in career whatsoever, that just making games is an interesting, enriching part of their life. We've also got folks who it was part of their portfolio stuff, but seeing those stories again is more of our yield. It's like the games are a means to that end, a bit like, again, the basketball games are not the point. It is what it does for the basketball players at that level. So that's us. I'm assuming most people in our group in this kind of event are not going to be customers. I'm not trying to sell to you. This is just an example of how we put into practice the stuff I've been talking about today, our 233 released games since 2015. If you're curious what the scale looks like, it's basically more advanced than game jams in most cases, but not as advanced as like a university capstone, and certainly not anywhere near commercial fidelity. But that is it. I'm ready for questions. If folks have questions, things you want to talk about, anything we do about project, yes? Sure. Yeah.
How is that a student-facing structure?
Yeah, so this used to be, and so literally the version of this, so our current structure, we renamed it over the summer and simplified things. I was making it too complicated. Our front page literally used to be like picking your lane. And it had a whole kind of checklist of like, does this apply to you, does this apply to you, does this apply to you? And the reason why I first needed to do it as a business was, I found that if I didn't have that lens on it, what happened was, I'd say I have some testimonials of experiences people in our groups, 2/3 of it didn't speak to the person reading it. They were like, well, I don't want a job in the game industry, so this doesn't sound like it's for me. But like for someone else, that's what they needed to hear. Someone was like, well, I don't want to be a hobbyist. This is a place. So that was the first reason I used to be facing them. We also used to have these kind of like charts where people could kind of, can't pull it up easily, basically like a scoring card of how many games they've led, how many games they were like secondary contributor on, if they've spoken at conferences, if they've done, there's kind of ways to solidify your ranking along these different tracks. They're also not mutually exclusive. There's pilts are often a blend, it shifts around. But this used to be more facing our people. Now it's not quite hidden, but it's not as forefront as it used to be. I think part of the challenge, especially when people are early in their journey, which is where a lot of people join a group like mine, they're not quite sure yet. And I think of this a little like, and this is, a lot of my learning philosophy is based on learning from children, so this is sound demeaning for adults. It's like when we're little kids, like every kid is a scientist and an artist and a dancer and a rapper and a mathematician, because they haven't had to get great at any of it yet. And like, oh, I'm all 3 of these, I'm all of these. And as they advance, they start to realize like, oh, I'm gonna die someday, and projects take time. And each thing I'm doing has trade-offs of which lane I'm going down. And then they start getting a little more serious about the depth of them. But one thing I realized is like, from my side, it makes sense to kind of think of people of, okay, I can identify, I think this person's kind of in this bucket, maybe steering that way. But we have reduced how much we put it in front of the developers, if that makes sense.
Do you find that people tend to stick in one lane?
Not intentionally. And part of why this has also been an important tool for helping assess and course correct people is they think they're in a different lane than they are in. The things they're doing are adding up towards something. And the example I used from this talk that I recently up on YouTube is, I've known folks who would spend 6 years preparing to get a job in industry. And then when they got the job in industry, and I'll use him because he's public, he talked about this when he came back as a guest speaker for us, made a bunch of games, it's kind of fun, some kangaroo boxing stuff and arcadey things like he liked as a kid, got a job, worked on some big games with Ubisoft that people have heard of. And then like every single day he would open the animation tool, and if a character T-posed, he was like, oh, I gotta write code all day. And like when he never actually got to even touch the game. I was like, this is not what I wanted out of my life. He'd be happier doing something else and making games on the side. And so it's kind of helping spot people early in their journey. Are they accidentally leaning one direction by their actions? Because what happens, right, we just find random internet information, Reddit, YouTube videos, people speaking their own experience without any lens on, is do I want what this person wants out of it? Am I getting on the path that they're on? Another reason that also happens in games, and this pollutes a lot of talks at GDC, etc., is that someone is, this is, I think, a slight twist, but still related. So a lot of advice in the indie scene is someone's making a 5 to 7 year game. They're giving a GDC talk after 4 years into it of what they're doing. They have no idea if that's working. No idea. Not a clue. And by the time they find out it doesn't, oh, they get real quiet and they stop giving talks. And so a lot of the talks are people who are just distributing, like, here's what I'm doing, and I'm going for it. And then they run out of savings, and they vanish. And it sucks. Anyway, it's looking out for, like, are the things they're doing actually lining up? Is the advice they're following on the track that makes sense for them? Or even just talking about, hey, just project forward. Same thing I did for each one of my jobs when I bounced a lot early in my career. I'd interview folks who had been there for a decade or two in academia at EA or whatever, like, what are the trade-offs you made? Is that the shape I want in my life? Nope, see ya, goodbye. And then I would wander on to, tuck and roll at that car while I was moving. But yeah, so it's a helpful tool, but again, people often don't realize what track they're in. They aren't looking at it through this lens. This has been a helpful way I try to help people steer about at least some intentionality of what they're doing adds up towards. Yes?
Yeah, I teach at college, and particularly interesting, like, talking about more how you, like, adapted it, but specifically for this question.
Sure.
You talk about grading the process, not the result. I'm
Right.
curious how you went about communicating that both to teachers, both to students, but also to admin.
Right, yeah. So fair. So basically the gist there was it was processed. And it's also because, like, it's a design course as opposed to a technical comp sci course, which gave us a little more freedom. But it was basically, so every single week in our update process for our communities, what we do in my own side thing is each lead's talking about, here's what I did in the week behind, or here's what happened in our team behind, here's the game running in its current shape, here's what I'm focusing on the week ahead. I gave that basically as a writing assignment to all students in the classroom of, what did you do last week? What are you currently in the middle of? What are you focusing on this week ahead? And, like, as well as maybe an extra question, like any concerns about your team or stuff you should be having a conversation about. Some mixture basically process-wise on that. On the end results, kind of one of those classic 360s, trying to grade so that we're at least a good teammate, et cetera, but trying to leave that freedom for people are here in this classroom for different reasons, with different objectives, different trajectories, what they're going for. There was on the side, too, in a way of going, I don't do it in my DevPods side stuff, but for school, we did absolutely still have some required readings or common industry talks to speak about. But it would often be related to, like, okay, we're doing prototyping coming up, so we're going to grab some of these examples of prototyping projects to discuss in class, but then trying to, like, apply that. And again, there's, like, micro writing assignment for the week of can you connect it to something we saw in one of these videos or reading things. I understand it's the shape of kind of nudging people along in this structure. I'll also note, as much as I sound like I'm so banging the drum for, like, people should learn independently, a lot of these students were much more serious about it, right? They would just really spend more time on these projects. They are much more invested. They're trying to recoup a 5-figure investment. It's a different situation than hobbyists with a few hours a week. So it's not to diminish it, but it is obviously a different kind of constraint. The other part, as far as how to explain to the administration, one trick is, like, I kind of didn't. I sort of went in there knowing that I was warned. I don't think this is a bad thing to, I shouldn't say it too much. Basically, when I was being pulled into the program, this was years ago, so the people aren't probably there anymore. Someone pointed out to me, like, hey, they're not really going to micromanage you. So for better fortune, kind of, like, do what you think you ought to do. And I'm like, sweet, I know exactly what I'm doing. Thanks. I think this is also one of these sort of challenges, right, where it would be difficult to make the case up front. As soon as you got a semester or two of results and people see, they're like, oh, shoot, the games turned out better. People were happier. They're responding to it. It becomes easier to make that case. If I don't know if there's any way I can help support trying to make an argument somewhere with somebody, I will be happy to try. But I do, again, understand there are different sort of challenges, constraints, curriculum stuff. It also might be the kind of shape where it's a little more like the challenge of having, like, a science fair class in high school, where it's not like there's chemistry assignments being given, but there's still facilitation of the group approach. It took more the shape of, like, the science fair lab, which is to say it also takes students have kind of maturity to, like, they will self-manage, they'll have some care about their outcomes, their graded results and stuff. I don't know if I answered it well enough. If there's any other kind of questions around that could be helpful. The processing was the main thing about are they doing it? Can they connect to some of the readings and stuff? Calling their shots, but again, also trying to make it okay. And part of the reason for the process step too is that, like I'm used to in my own groups, they will announce what they're intending to do. Their answer may change. That's part of how they can learn about better course correcting their estimation, time spent, etc. There could also be the time challenge is also an unequal thing to represent. And this also comes up in, like, indie teams. Someone's like, oh, they distributed, I don't know, a royalty split based on time spent. And, like, if John Williams spends 2 hours on my project, he deserves more than 2 hours proportionally because he spent his whole career in life doing that. These classrooms have people who, like, just started this year doing it, and also people who've been doing it since they were, like, 8. And so it's really, really not even a good time gauge of, like, maybe they spent 2 hours that week, but they're, like, carrying 70% of the project. It's a really, really mucky thing to try to score beyond. Are your teammates chill with what's going on with that project and your involvement with it, kind of thing? Oh, 1 minute. Okay. Any last question? Yes?
Have you found a minimum age that this process works for? Like, how young?
Yeah, so I've deployed this for college age and older, mostly older anymore, but obviously the college clubs are still running. The main challenge I've had with younger folks is that it is a smaller percentage of the population who is has a head start enough in the math or science. Again, like a bit like science fair. It may be a fit for some of the students. It's probably hard for an entire classroom of people to populate. There's also a lot of challenges there about the ownership for people who are minors. You got to go through their parents. It's complicated about that, about the privacy protection, about advertising to them, about moderating interactions on Discord, etc. There's reasons why I haven't been able to find an easy or affordable way to make this available to younger people. That said, I do think there are probably folks in high school currently who could be doing this sort of thing. Younger than that, I would say about age 13 is I can finally start doing some basic coding stuff. It also tends to take them long enough that it doesn't have the same payoff or rewards of like, oh, I can really see my thing coming together. Y'all also acknowledge like game makers here, right? Like there's tools and stuff also that, for that honest, there's also adults using those too, but maybe more accessible than some of the more semantically intense programming approaches that adults use that may also make it more open to those kind of audiences too, those classrooms and stuff. But I think I'm out of time. All right, thanks so much. Hey!